George Mann has written many books, from historical steampunk adventures to Doctor Who tales to Sherlock Holmes short stories. But within the Star Wars universe, his main contribution thus far has been 3 themed anthologies: Star Wars Myths and Fables, Star Wars Dark Legends, and Star Wars Life Day Treasury, which among other things recanonized Chewie's family of Mala, Lumpy, and Itchy. In this first round of the second phase of the High Republic series, Mann wrote the middle grade novel Quest for the Hidden City, as well as the audio drama The Battle of Jeddah. So, a brief summary. When a Republic Pathfinder's team communications droid is found drifting damage through space, Jedi Knight Silandra Sho and her Padawan Rupert Nitani are sent to find the missing team members. But their investigation leads them to the planet of Gloam, which is said to be ravaged by mythical monsters. So first, a timeline disclaimer. Like the adult novel Convergence and the young adult novel Path of Deceit that it was released with, Quest for the Hidden City is set 150 years before Light of the Jedi. So, moving on to the good. I liked getting to be introduced to new Jedi here, especially Silandra and Rupert, who aren't quite what I expected. Silandra is very focused on always taking the peaceful route first, to the extent that while she does carry a lightsaber, she also carries a shield. I thought this was an interesting concept of just Jedi having shields. We've seen shields before in earlier expanded universe Legends material. Like there's some pretty cool shields in Shatterpoint by Matthew Stover, but I thought this was a cool way to show how the Jedi of this era are different than the Jedi we meet in the prequels. Her Padawan, Rupert Nitani, has very interesting Force abilities. She's almost able to use the Force to see the concentration of life around her, and she almost views it in colorful auras. So when they first land on Obados, the homeworld of the Katakut, and they're not sure where they live, they don't seem to see a city at all, Rupert is able to use her Force abilities to sense the direction that the city is in, that it's this underground place, because she sees that concentration of color. And I just thought that was such a interesting way to approach the Force, that if you are in tune with all the life around you, that yeah, you may be able to sense life and sense life in this very colorful, visible way. I think too there is a trend in a lot of these books to have, especially the Padawan character, the young Jedi Knight character, not sure their place in the world and what they want to do. And while Rupert does have a little bit of that at times, she seems pretty confident in what she's doing, and she has a master who's supporting her. Second, I appreciated that Mann decided to write like a Star Wars horror novel, but keep it very kid-friendly. I am not a horror reader, and especially in a children's book, I'm always worried, is it going to be too scary for young readers? And while I do think that there were a lot of threatening situations here, I think that it never got too dark, it never got too scary, and in fact, as an adult reader, I was able to figure out the origin of the monsters on Gloam pretty quickly, and I suspect even for a child reader, they'd be somewhat suspicious of things until it's revealed, being like, this situation is not what it seems. But onto the more meh front, my first note is that Rupert is a terrible name. I think her last name, Nitani, is fine. That sounds great. But Rupert? Rupert? I don't know. Sometimes in Star Wars we have names that sound too Earth names, and sometimes in Star Wars we have names that are just absolutely dreadful. And I am so sorry, Rupert. I think you're an interesting character, but your name is just bad. My second issue was that it felt like Quest for the Hidden City was a little slow in finding its feet and getting off the ground here. And I think part of that is we find the droid, they figure out where the droid came from, then they go to Obadas, and then they talk to the Katakut there, and then they learn that, oh, well, the other team went to Gloam and we haven't heard from them since. So there's a lot of things to get them to Gloam. And I think once they arrive there and start investigating, and especially the last third when we realize who the villain is and events start escalating, I think the pace worked a lot better for me than it did in really the first half of the story. Third, I just think there were way too many characters here, to the point that by the end, I didn't feel particularly attached to anyone of them, just because there were so many. First, we have Das and his father Spence, who are hyperspace prospectors, and they've been betrayed by a colleague and abandoned on Gloam. Then we have Salandra and Rupert and the rest of their pathfinding team. And then we've got the Katakut that they encounter, and some of them accompany them to Gloam. And then we've got the other pathfinding team that something horrible happened to them on Gloam. And there's just so many characters to keep track of, and I didn't always remember like their name and their role other than Rupert and Salandra and Das and his dad. I felt like, especially for the introductory book in this phase 2, and not just any introductory book, but the middle grade one, maybe the character list should have been pruned back a little. And last, I found Quest for the Hidden City surprisingly standalone here. On the one hand, I think that it's best that the middle grade novels especially tell their own story that's separate from the adult novels and even the young adult novels, because a child audience is not going to seek those out, and so you want a story that can stand on its own feet without having to have knowledge of books for other age groups. But I guess I was so used to how in phase 1 all the books were interconnected, there were references out the wazoo. So I was honestly surprised when Quest for the Hidden City turned out to be just a monster story in which the villain was just motivated by greed and nothing else. So in short, Quest for the Hidden City is the first middle grade novel of this Phase 2 expansion of the High Republic series, and while it introduced us to Jedi characters with interesting abilities, and I think told a pretty good kid-friendly horror monster tale, I'm not sure how well it did to introduce this phase 2 of storytelling as a whole, because there were a lot of characters to keep track of, and I didn't really come out of the book with any clear favorites that I really want to know more about. And the pace was a little bit slow here. It's got artwork just like the previous books did. This one does not have artwork by Petter Antonsen, who illustrated the previous 3 books, but artwork by Nyla Magruder. I don't like her art quite as much as Antonsen's, but I'll put a link down in the description box for scans of the illustrations so you can look at them for yourself.